case of Chris Watts. Shannon Razusek and Christopher Watts, both from North Carolina, met in 2012. Shannon was from Aberdeen, and Chris was from Spring Lake. They tied the knot on November 3, 2012, but not everyone was thrilled about their union. Chris' parents, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, didn't attend the wedding, with Cindy later explaining that she didn't get along with Shannon and didn't like how she treated her son. A year after getting married, Shannon and Chris moved to Frederick, Colorado, marking a fresh start in their lives. They were excited to start a family and eventually welcomed 2 daughters, Bella Marie, born on December 17, 2013, and Celeste Catherine, Cece, born on July 17, 2015. Shannon had been diagnosed with lupus, a chronic autoimmune disease, at a young age. Despite the challenges this presented for getting pregnant, Shannon defied the odds and became a mother twice. She was known for her kindness, compassion, and positivity, and was determined to create a happy life for herself and her family. Shannon was a loving and exceptional mother, and her vibrant personality drew people to her. Every morning, she would send her friends heartfelt texts that read, "Good morning, beautiful," making them feel cherished and uplifted. Her daughters, Bella and Cece, were the center of her universe, and she devoted herself to nurturing and supporting them. Shannon was active on social media, sharing videos that offered a glimpse into her daily life and that of her daughters. Her friends and family cherished these videos, which showcased her warm personality. In many of these videos, Shannon expressed her deep admiration for her husband, Chris, portraying him as a loving husband and father. However, those close to the family found Chris difficult to connect with on a deeper level, as he tended to keep to himself. Despite their reservations, Shannon's family and friends accepted Chris because of her deep love for him. However, the couple was struggling financially, and in June 2015, they filed for bankruptcy due to a heavy mortgage, multiple car payments, loans, medical bills, and significant credit card debt. At the time, Chris worked at Anadarko Petroleum, while Shannon worked at a children's hospital call center. However, by 2016, Shannon had changed careers, becoming a consultant for a multi-level marketing company, selling a nutritional supplement administered through a patch. Shannon loved her job, and it showed. As her coworker Cynthia DeRosette put it, she had a way of making everyone she met feel her positive energy. Despite being happy with her life, Shannon had one wish: to have a baby boy to complete her family with her husband and 2 daughters. In spring 2018, Shannon got an unexpected but wonderful surprise. She was pregnant again. Overjoyed and excited, she wanted to capture her husband Chris's reaction, so she planned to surprise him on May 28th with the news. Further tests confirmed Shannon was having a baby boy. Shannon and Chris chose the name Nico for their new baby. When they told their daughters Bella and Cece they would be big sisters, the girls were happy. In the summer of 2018, when Shannon was pregnant with Nico, she visited her family in North Carolina, while Chris stayed behind in Colorado for work. Shannon took her daughters, Bella and Cece, to visit Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie, despite having a strained relationship with them. During the visit, Cindy prepared a snack for Cece, without considering Shannon's prior warning about Cece's severe nut allergy. As a result, the snack contained peanuts, which put Cece's life in danger. Shannon was deeply disturbed by this incident, feeling that Cindy had recklessly disregarded her granddaughter's safety. Shannon expressed her outrage and disappointment in a text message to Chris, accusing his mother of intentionally trying to provoke her by putting Cece's life at risk. She urged Chris to confront his father about Cindy's behavior, implying that if Chris didn't take action, it would suggest he was complicit in his mother's harmful actions and that Shannon's concerns for her children's safety were justified. While Shannon was visiting her family in North Carolina, she noticed a sudden change in Chris's communication style. He stopped responding to her messages and calls, leaving her confused and concerned. When she asked him what was going on, Chris explained that he had taken on more responsibilities at work due to the arrival of new employees, but reassured her that everything was fine. A week later, Chris flew to North Carolina to spend time with Shannon and their 2 daughters, Bella and Cece. The girls were excited to see their father and ran to hug him as soon as he arrived. Chris was enthusiastic in his greeting, scooping them up in a tight hug. However, his greeting to Shannon was noticeably colder. Instead of a kiss, he simply nodded at her. Shannon felt hurt and surprised by Chris's distant behavior, and she couldn't help but confide in a friend about her growing concerns through a text message. Shannon felt like she was living with a stranger, not the man she married. She was saddened and confused by the change in Chris. When they were in the same room, he refused to talk to her, and instead, they communicated through their phones. Shannon sent a heartbreaking text to her friend, explaining the situation, and even shared a photo of them sitting on separate couches, facing away from each other. Shannon suspected that Chris might be interested in someone else, which shocked her friend. However, her friend disagreed, saying that Chris loved Shannon too much to do that. But Shannon was devastated because Chris had told her that he no longer thought they were compatible. This was a huge surprise to Shannon, who had always believed their love was strong. Chris had confessed to Shannon that he had hoped getting her pregnant would change his feelings, but it didn't. Shannon was devastated to hear this, as she treasured their relationship and thought their love could overcome any obstacle. Desperate to save her family, Shannon proposed that they attend couples counseling to work through their issues. However, Chris refused. Shannon was willing to do whatever it took to rescue their relationship, but she realized Chris was not willing to meet her halfway. Despite her best efforts, Shannon came to understand that Chris was unwilling to compromise on anything. After their return to Colorado from North Carolina, the family settled back into their routine. However, Shannon soon left for another business trip, this time to Arizona. During her trip to Arizona, Shannon's friends noticed a change in her behavior. She seemed confused, distressed, and not her usual cheerful self. One evening, while they were all in their hotel room, Shannon opened up to her friends about her concerns. She told them that Chris had expressed doubts about their relationship and refused to go to couples therapy. On August 11th, while Shannon was still in Arizona, she received a notification on her phone about a restaurant charge on her and Chris' account. The amount of the charge raised her suspicions, and she wondered if Chris was having dinner with someone else. This made her feel uneasy and doubtful. When Shannon returned home from her trip on August 13th, her friend Nicole Atkinson drove her home. Their doorbell camera captured Shannon entering her house at around 1:48 a.m. The next morning, Shannon's friends became worried when they didn't receive their usual good morning messages from her. They knew she had an important doctor's appointment at 9:30 a.m. and were concerned that something might be wrong. When Shannon missed a 12:30 p.m. business meeting, her close friend Nicole Atkinson became alarmed. As the day went by with no word from Shannon, Nicole's concern grew. She sensed something was off. Feeling a strong urge to act, Nicole drove to Shannon's house. As she arrived, she felt a knot in her stomach. Shannon's van was parked in the garage, and her daily shoes sat by the front door. Nicole knocked on the front door, hoping Shannon would emerge, explaining that she had overslept after her flight the previous day. But there was no response. One of Shannon's friends contacted her husband Chris, telling him they couldn't reach her. Chris reassured them, thinking Shannon might have taken their daughters to a friend's house. Shannon's friends were puzzled by Chris's response because they had all been in touch with each other, and none of them knew where Shannon was. She had no plans to meet up with any of them. As a result, her friends told Chris they planned to contact the Frederick Police Department to report Shannon and their daughters, Bella and Cece, as missing. However, Chris did not want to involve the police. One of Shannon's friends, Nicole, was so worried that she went ahead and called 911 to report the three missing. After Nicole's call, a police officer from the Frederick Police Department arrived at the Watts home. The officer's body cam footage showed Nicole's distress as she explained what she knew about Shannon and her daughters. When Chris arrived, he approached the officer, but unlike Nicole, he did not appear to be very concerned, despite his wife and daughters being missing. During a search of Shannon and Chris's home, the officer found Shannon's purse, which contained her medication and that of her two daughters. This finding concerned Shannon's friend Nicole, but Chris, her husband, remained unusually calm. The officer also discovered Shannon's wedding pants on the bedside table. Afterwards, the officer and Chris went to a neighbor's house to review the footage from their security camera. A camera captured footage of Chris's driveway and garage, showing him opening the garage door, moving around and leaving the house at 5:28 a.m. When Chris watched the footage with the police, his behavior changed. He became nervous and fidgety, which didn't go unnoticed by his neighbor, who suggested to the officer that Chris wasn't acting normal. Chris's reluctance to search for his wife and daughters, Bella and Cece, raised concerns among Shannon's friends, who found it incomprehensible that he wasn't worried about their disappearance. As the investigation unfolded, the police canvassed the neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen Shannon or anything unusual. The FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation joined the search the next day, along with the Boulder Police Department's cadaver dogs, which searched the property and inside the house. During the search, An officer handling a cadaver dog commented that the house smelled of cleaning products and seemed unusually clean. The officer's suspicions were raised by a comment, leading them to inspect the cleanliness of the home more closely. The presence of cleaning products hinted that someone might have tried to hide evidence or erase potential clues. While his house was being searched, Chris gave an interview to 2 Denver news stations outside his residence. During the interview, Chris claimed that he and Sean hadn't argued before she left, but he did mention they had an emotional conversation. Chris appealed to whoever was holding his family, begging for their return and expressing his desire to be reunited with them. He emphasized that his house felt empty without them, but his behavior during the interview raised concerns. Chris appeared cold and unemotional, which surprised those who knew him. Shanann's friends, who watched the interview, were disgusted by Chris's nonchalant demeanor, finding it strange and contradictory to his plea for his family's return. On August 14th, Special Agent Coda conducted an interview with Chris. During the conversation, Chris suggested that Sean might have taken the girls to a friend's house to unwind. Meanwhile, the police station received a flood of tips about possible sightings of Sean and the girls. The department received various photos, which Chris was asked to review to see if he could identify his missing wife and daughters. However, he was unable to provide any identifications. Agent Coda also asked Chris about his marriage to Sean during the interview. Chris claimed that he had never been unfaithful to Sean and, to the best of his knowledge, she had never been unfaithful to him either. He explained that they were the type of couple who would confide in each other if they ever felt tempted to stray. One notable aspect of Chris's behavior during the interview caught Agent Coda's attention. Chris frequently made hand movements towards his neck. Agent Coda's intuition was growing stronger, suggesting the movements might be pointing to a more sinister truth. During the interview, Agent Coda stepped out briefly to share his concerns with the other officers, suspecting Chris might have strangled Sean. As the hours ticked by with no sign of Sean and her daughters, the loved one's anxiety turned to desperation. Despite their fears for Shanann's safety, they held onto the glimmer of hope that Bella and Cece might still be alive. The lack of updates from the authorities only added to their distress. After a 3-hour interrogation, Chris was released from the police department, but the police instructed him to return the next day, August 15th, for a polygraph test. Here's what happened. Chris agreed to take a polygraph test to help with the investigation into his family's disappearance. On August 15th, Chris picked up his father from the airport and went to the Frederick Police Department, where Tammy Lee from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation administered the test. During the test, Chris denied any involvement in his family's disappearance and claimed not to know where his wife Sean was. However, the results of the test were not in Chris's favor. This led the detectives to strongly suspect that Chris was responsible for the deaths of his wife and daughters. Tammy Lee, a highly skilled polygrapher, confronted Chris about the test results. Chris admitted that he had caused Sean emotional pain, but denied physically harming her. He also confessed to having an affair with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger, which he deeply regretted. Despite his confessions, Chris still denied any involvement in his family's disappearance. At one point, he asked to have his father, Ronnie, present during the interview. The officers were hesitant, worried that this might lead Chris to ask for a lawyer. Chris Watt's father was allowed to accompany him in the interrogation room, a risky move that detectives hoped would prompt Chris to confess. And it worked. Chris admitted to killing Sean but claimed he did so because she had harmed their daughters, Bella and Cece. However, this excuse was immediately met with skepticism by Shanann's friends, who knew she would never hurt her children. In fact, Sean was eagerly awaiting the birth of her third child, a son named Nico. During the interrogation, Chris disclosed the location of Shanann's body, which he had buried in a shallow grave at one of his work sites. He also revealed that he had disposed of his daughters' bodies in oil tanks. Despite this, Chris continued to deny any involvement in their deaths. Even after being arrested and taken into custody, the detectives never believed Sean was responsible for harming her daughters. In the end, Chris pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the sentencing hearing for Chris, the judge expressed outrage over the brutal crime Chris had committed, calling it the most inhumane and vicious one he had seen in his entire career of handling thousands of cases. Years later, Chris confessed to murdering his wife Sean in their bed. According to Chris, he strangled her after she discovered his infidelity and threatened to take their daughters away. Chris then put Shanann's body in his truck and drove to his work site with their 2 daughters. Tragically, Chris admitted to killing his daughters one by one at the site, with one daughter forced to witness the murder of her sister before meeting the same fate. If you're enjoying these documentaries and would like to support the channel, I'd truly appreciate it. Creating these videos takes a lot of time and effort. If you'd like to help me keep bringing you high-quality true crime content, you can now send a gift through YouTube. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Every subscriber brings us one step closer to monetization and helps me create even better documentaries for you. Whether you send a gift, subscribe, or simply keep watching and sharing these videos, your support means more than you know. Thank you for watching, and let's continue to the next case.
We've just gone up to the workshop to get some things out.
Yeah.
And somebody came up with some line.
Yeah.
Some taxes and set fire to the place.
It's the building that's on fire.
Yeah.
It is okay then.
I got out. I managed to get them.
Right. It's okay. Is everybody out of the building?
No, there's still my partner in.
Right. Is he able to get out of the building?
No, because there's fires near the door.
Burghley Marsh, England. Sunday the 13th of March, 2011. Firefighters rushed to the scene and were there within minutes. When they arrived, they found the caller, 43-year-old Julie Dixon, standing outside by the gate, hysterical and crying. Her hair had been singed and her face was covered with soot. Her partner David was still in the building and the fire crew needed to find him as quickly as possible. Julie was able to explain to them where in the building David was, saying, "He's locked in there, he's in there." They bundled him in. When the crew manager went into the building, he saw by a door a can of burning liquid. Other than that, there was no fire in the foyer. The acrid smell of smoke was suffocating and soot filled the air. The fire crew soon realized that the fire had actually burnt itself out. This was not a big fire that had engulfed the building. This was a small fire that had been set in a specific place. They made their way to the cupboard that David had been locked in and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The door had been made by David himself and was incredibly secure and sturdy. They were able to knock a hole through, and upon peering inside, they could see that he was in there on his knees facing the door. He wasn't responding to them. They used an axe and continued to hack away at the door and were finally able to release it. David fell out towards them and onto the floor. There was very little room for the crew to work on him, so he was carried outside and the paramedics worked desperately to try and revive him as he was in cardiac arrest. In the back of the ambulance, the paramedics tried for roughly 30 minutes, but it was no use. David Twigg had died. No keys were found on David, and the cupboard he had been locked in could only be locked from the outside. The keys were nowhere to be found. There was no way he had locked himself in. This was clearly a murder. Julie was taken to the hospital to be treated and was later told that her partner hadn't made it. Julie was completely hysterical and utterly distraught, at one point collapsing in grief. When she was in a better state and discharged from hospital, she was interviewed by specially trained officers as the investigation got underway to try and figure out how and why David had died. Due to the chaos and confusion of the initial scene, they needed to go through it bit by bit to build a clear picture of the timeline of events and a clear picture of their victim. Burghley Marsh is truly a picturesque place to live. Quaint and rural with a strong sense of community. Crime is rare and people feel safe in this little town. One of those in the community who was well liked and respected was 46-year-old David Twigg. He lived there with his partner of 15 years, 43-year-old Julie Dixon. They had been together since 1996. When they met, Julie was going through a divorce and she and David moved in with each other soon after meeting. Julie received money following the divorce and used it to purchase land in Station Yard. The land had a 3-bedroom bungalow and an old railway engine shed, which they converted and used to run a bespoke joinery business, specializing in windows, doors, and staircases. The office was situated at the front of the building, and this is where Julie would run things from. She would book in appointments, deal with suppliers, and the general day-to-day runnings of the business. Then there was the workshop where David would create and work on projects. And then at the back was a small corridor and storage cupboard. David had been born and raised in Lincolnshire and lived not far from his parents, Janice and Roy, and David was their only child. He was quiet and more reserved than Julie, and she was certainly the more outgoing of the two. David and Julie worked together, lived together, and spent much of their free time with each other too, appearing to many as a very happy couple. David's parents loved Julie, and she was very much like a daughter to them. David would later become interested in motor racing and wanted to expand out and decided to sponsor one of the teams after becoming friendly with racer John Mickle and John's wife Lisa. The couples grew close and began spending more time together. David and Julie also started a new company called Kitchen Bits and Bobs, which they were getting off the ground and wanted to work with the motor racing team to promote it. David was proud of his business, and the chance to reach a wider audience through sponsoring the racing team proved to be a worthwhile and successful endeavor. John and David would work together, as would Lisa and Julie. The couples traveled together and continued to grow close. That happiness and joy was now gone. As Julie sat in a police interview room while the hunt for whoever was responsible for her partner's murder began, her story was horrifying. She said that although they had covered their faces, she thought they were white, but apart from that could give no further descriptions of them. After shutting David in the store cupboard, they pulled her over to where a circular saw was kept and switched on. She struggled and fought with everything she had, and was able to break free, wriggling out of her hoodie and running out of the building. She said she remembered seeing the two men running out of the building too, around the back and away from the scene. Seeing that they had now gone, she ran back towards the workshop to try and find David. But upon opening the door, she was met with fire and smoke which had burnt her face and singed her hair. David was trapped and she couldn't get to him. She couldn't say much more due to the trauma and shock. Her interviews would have to be suspended as she was too emotional to carry on. She issued a statement following the intense media interest. "I am so numb with pain. My heart is broken. I've not just lost my partner of 15 years. I've lost the love of my life, my best friend and soulmate." The news quickly spread throughout the area and people were stunned. Violent crime was just not something that happened in Burla Marsh, and nobody could understand who would want David of all people dead, and even for many of the officers, they had never worked on a case like this. The police also issued an appeal for anyone who had been in and around the area that Sunday to come forward, as they may have seen something relevant. People in the area were understandably frightened. This was such a shocking and violent crime with no apparent motive, and everybody was left fearing if it could happen again. To the police, this seemed like a very unusual place to commit such a violent offense. This was a quiet and rural place, and the property was described as being off the beaten track with limited access points. It was not the kind of place you stumbled across. You had to know where it was and have local knowledge. The following day, Monday the 14th, Lisa Mickle received a call at around 7 in the morning from her friend Julie, who was inconsolable and crying. She kept saying, he's dead. But Lisa didn't know what she was on about and continued to ask her who it was she was talking about. When she replied it was David who had died, Lisa tried to get more information, but Julie could only say a few words like fire, masked men, and attacked. Lisa immediately grabbed her keys and made the 4-hour trip to Lincolnshire to support her friend. Julie was at her parents' house when Lisa arrived, and she was clearly in shock. Lisa could not believe it when she saw Julie, who was rocking in a chair, with her hair singed and her face burnt. Julie told Lisa that she and David had gone to go and lock up. She had asked him to go and get a light bulb from the cupboard, and suddenly they were set upon by the intruders, who had locked David in there before starting the fire. A few weeks before David's murder, Julie had called Lisa in a very distressed state and said that her phone line had been cut off and then restored, as had her electricity. She was worried that it was someone targeting them. Lisa immediately told this to the police. Following this, specialist search teams conducted fingertip searches of the surrounding area to see if they could find anything. And in some shrubbery and mud, the keys to the door had been found on land belonging to a neighbor. There were no fingerprints or DNA, but finding them in that location supported Julie's version of events that the intruders had run off in that direction after starting the fire. The post-mortem results came back, and it was found that David Twigg had died as a result of the products of combustion, which are the poisonous gases that are caused following a fire, and smoke inhalation. Soot was found in his stomach and lungs. This meant that when the fire had started and continued to burn, David was still alive and breathing. In order to ascertain a possible motive, a financial investigator was brought on board. This unearthed some very interesting evidence. The business had come under intense financial hardship, and Julie had hidden the extent of this from David. She was the one in charge of the finances and administration of the business and never told him about the mounting debts that were piling up rapidly. The financial investigator discovered that none of the creditors, nor anyone from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, had actually spoken to David throughout any of this. They had always spoken to and dealt with Julie. She had even hidden from him that a warrant had actually been issued for his arrest for not cooperating with the official receiver after he had been declared bankrupt in October 2010 after owing HMRC thousands. She would tell officials that David was unable to deal with it, saying he was abroad and that he was also terminally ill, neither of which were true. The warrant for his arrest had been issued 3 days before his death. The police also found out that the post had been diverted to a local garage and Julie would be the one to go and pick it up. This was so that David would not be privy to any of the letters that were sent to them. He had started to become aware of some of it after he was shocked to discover that Julie had actually remortgaged to inject money into the business. Considering the financial trouble they were in and the enormous debts that had been racked up, officers were curious as to why Julie had made no mention of this. A fire investigator went to the scene, and it was his job to work out how the fire had been started. It was a difficult job, as fire can often destroy vital evidence that helps piece together the story of a crime scene. Forensic officers were also trying to find fingerprints and DNA left by the alleged assailants. Based on the evidence, it was believed that the fire had been started after petrol had been poured onto the floor of the foyer. There was a red molten object on the floor, believed to be a part of a can of fuel. And in the workshop, placed on top of a blue barrel, was a red petrol can. This appeared to be staged, and not the result of people running away after quickly starting the fire. The police then called in a police dog handler for their assistance, and an expert was brought in from Derby with a Springer Spaniel dog. They took the dog around the crime scene, and it too was able to detect and indicate that an accelerant had been used. As they carried on investigating, they discovered that the local garage had surveillance cameras, and someone was caught on camera purchasing petrol on the morning of the blaze. It was none other than Julie Dixon. This was also something she had failed to mention. When asked by the police why she had done this, she said that they had been doing some work in the garden and she needed to go and get some petrol for the lawnmower. Another thing that struck the officers as very strange was that Julie had a BlackBerry mobile phone but told them she didn't know the PIN and therefore couldn't give them access to it. To try and gain access, the police contacted experts in Canada to see if it could be accessed without the PIN and without the data being lost, but this was not possible. She had been using it up until the day of David's murder, so nobody else had accessed it and nobody else had changed the PIN. Why now was she saying she didn't know it? 2 months after the murder, David's body was released to his family so they could have a funeral for him. The couple's friend Lisa was shocked by Julie's behavior. Julie was cracking jokes, being loud and inappropriate, a far cry from the devastated woman who had called 999. Her behavior was erratic and attracting attention, and Lisa said she began to feel in her gut that something was very, very wrong. As time ticked by, Julie's behavior continued to raise suspicions. Lisa recalled that at one motorcar race meeting, when they arrived, there had been a police car there. At the sight of this, Julie for no reason exploded and began to scream and shout and hit things around her. She then started to cry and rock back and forth. As Lisa tried to find out what was wrong and what had sparked this reaction, all Julie could say was, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The police officers had seized Julie's clothes to examine them. Since she had been in such close contact with the assailants, it was hoped that there would have been some sort of transfer DNA from them to her clothes, but there was no such evidence on them. However, they did show something that was strange. Traces of petrol were found on her clothes, and they could not have come from the fire. They had come from pouring the petrol. Her injuries were also not consistent with her being hit by a backdraft after opening the door, which is what she said had happened. More disturbing evidence came to light when laptops and computers from the home were looked into. In December 2010, just a few months before David's murder, the couple's computer was used under an account named Julie. Several internet searches had been made. The thing that kills you and does not show on a postmortem. How can I disguise tablets in food? I've tried to disguise tablets in chocolate syrup, but it still does not work. Chocolate syrup had been ordered online. Julie had collected and signed for the delivery. She had also mentioned to her friends that she was not happy in her relationship and wanted to start a new life with David out of the picture. All of this new information made the officers investigating David's death see her 999 call in a whole new light. When she called, why hadn't her first information been that her partner was trapped inside a burning building? Why had she made such a point about the intruders and where they had gone in the workshop when the more vital information was that David was still in there? Julie's story was falling apart. The 6th of June, 2011. A suspect was arrested and taken to Skegness police station to be interviewed. 43-year-old Julie Dixon. She went into the interview room with her solicitor, and to the shock of the police, they were given a prepared statement. In relation to the death of my partner David Twigg, I wish to say the following. David and I decided that day to jointly commit suicide in the workshop. David poured petrol, which I had bought for the lawnmower. She then said that she took the matches, set one alight, and then tossed it onto the petrol. As the fire started and the flames spread, she said she panicked and ran away, leaving David locked inside. She said she accepted that, by my actions through our suicide pact, I am responsible for the death of David. I realized that in panic and fear I have misled the police as to what happened, and I apologize for this. The police were stunned. This was the last thing they had been expecting her to say. When she was asked to elaborate and provide more information, all she said was no comment. David's friend John Mickle, Lisa's husband, refused to believe that this had been a suicide pact, as did many others. There was simply no evidence to suggest that David was unhappy, let alone intent on harming himself. The police hadn't charged her and they were running out of time. They too did not believe that this was a suicide pact gone wrong. They believed that this was more than likely a case of her trying to shift blame and not take responsibility for what she had done to him. So they spoke to the Crown Prosecution Service and the decision was reached that Julie Dixon would be charged with the murder of David Twigg. This happened the following day on the 7th of June. She entered a plea of not guilty to the charge of murder and was remanded in custody. Her trial date was set for the 5th of December 2011. She went on trial at Lincoln Crown Court with Judge Michael Heath presiding, and it was here that her story would change yet again. Now she said she hadn't actually wanted to die, but David did, and she had assisted him in his suicide. She said that he had been the one to pour the petrol and strike the match, but then she had had a change of mind about assisting him and fled. One officer said that it was a clear attempt to distance herself in any way she could from his death and put the responsibility for it onto him. The prosecution were adamant that this was not true. This was not an assisted suicide. This was a cold-blooded, premeditated, and brutal murder. When looking at possible motives, the financial trouble that the couple were in and the extent of which she was hiding from him was laid bare. The court heard that £396,000 had been borrowed over the previous 7 years. This was an amalgamation of remortgaging and loans, and the money was used to pay off some of the debts the business had, home renovations and credit cards. Julie said that David was aware of the mounting debts and financial problems, and said that she had never taken any money from the business for her own personal spending. She also denied forging his signature to remove money from the account. She said he knew he had been made bankrupt and described him as distraught. To the shock of the court on the second day of her trial on the 7th of December, Julie Dixon changed her plea and pleaded guilty, breaking down in tears as she addressed the judge. She said that the reason for changing her plea was because it was not fair to the family and she didn't want to put them through it. Judge Heath said, "How hollow those words sounded when they were uttered. How hypocritical they were." Following this, it was left to the judge to decide on the facts of the case and the motive. Over the following 5 days, the many different stories Julie had told were presented to the court. Firstly, the intruders, then it being a suicide pact, then an assisted suicide, and the lies upon lies she had told to investigators and friends and family. The house of cards she had built up around herself by hiding mail, intercepting calls, lying to Lisa about being targeted by unknown assailants, and not being honest about the financial issues to David, was all starting to collapse around her. The bailiffs were going to go to the property to remove assets and recover some of the money that was owed, and she could not keep up her lies for much longer, thus providing a motive for wanting David out of the picture. The prosecution put forward what they believed had happened that day. They said that she had lured David into the cupboard before running out and locking him inside. She had then poured petrol on the floor, struck the match, and started the fire. This had caused a vapor cloud which had singed her hair and burnt her face. This was what her injuries were consistent with. While David was consumed by the smoke that was rushing in under the door, she ran outside and threw the keys away. She then went to the bathroom in the bungalow to wash her hands and saw in the mirror that she had been injured by the vapor cloud. This was something that she hadn't planned for. Singed hair was found in the bathroom sink and it belonged to Julie. This meant that while her partner lay dying in a small, dark cupboard, she was in the bungalow looking at herself in the mirror before staging her call to 999. The prosecution said the critical question in this case may well be who locked the storeroom door. It is our case that this defendant, Julie Dixon, locked the door, and her purpose in doing so was murder. There was no light in the cupboard and no windows either. David would have been in total darkness as the smoke rushed in and took his life. After all the evidence was presented, the judge sided with the prosecution. 43-year-old Julie Dixon was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 23 years. The judge said that the call Julie had made to the emergency services and later how she had behaved in hospital would be worthy of the highest praise had she been an actress in a fictional drama and would have merited an Oscar. He also said she was interviewed as a victim of crime, behaving like one. She gave a detailed, untruthful account of what had happened, punctuated by tears and sobbing. It was all a charade, her account being made up. That was designed to mislead the police. She lied and lied and lied. David Twigg was an amiable, hardworking, and honorable man. What you did to him was evil. There was a significant degree of planning and premeditation. The pain that your prolonged and multiple lying has caused David Twiggs' parents can only be imagined. The judge said that Julie's assertion that David had wanted to die was a pack of lies. Detective Chief Inspector Stuart Gibbons said, "At no stage in the police interview or the court case did she show any remorse or reason why she did what she did. We may never know the motive." After she was sentenced, David's parents said, "We have lost our only son David at the hands of someone we have loved and treated as a daughter. David was a kind, decent, hardworking man who took great pride in that work and the service he provided to people. We do not want to comment on our thoughts about Julie Dixon, who is finally admitted to murdering our wonderful son, but have to say we are happy to see justice finally being done and will leave her with her own thoughts. The pain caused by Julie Dixon's lies is quite simply impossible to comprehend. David Twigg was a man whom many loved and respected. He was friendly, kind, and would do anything for anyone. He had worked hard to build up his businesses and his standing within his close-knit community. His life was ended in a brutal way that many of us can scarcely begin to imagine, at the hands of a woman he had given 15 years of his life to. For his devastated parents, their lives forever changed that Sunday evening in 2011. His mom Janice said, "David was all Roy and I had. Not being able to see him or speak and talk with him and tell him how much we love him is very hard to accept." His father Roy echoed this, saying, "I can't say anything more. Only losing David has created a vast void that I'm struggling to fill." This case takes us to Rockdale, a village in the state of Illinois, located a little over 40 miles west of Chicago. May the 13th, 1997 started out like any other typical day in Rockdale, Illinois. The sun was beating down relentlessly on a building construction site, where heavy machinery and workers were busy moving debris and waste from a dusty landfill. Amidst all the chaos and noise, Kevin P. McGowan, an archaeologist from the prestigious University of Illinois, was quietly and methodically sifting through the layers of refuse and debris, searching for any hidden artifacts or historical remnants. But little did he know that he was about to stumble upon something far more shocking and disturbing than he could ever have imagined. As his eyes sifted through the layers of debris, his trained eyes noticed something peculiar. There, buried beneath the dusty landfill in Rockdale, Illinois, was a bone unlike any other in the pile. He felt a jolt of excitement as he carefully extracted it from the debris. His heart raced with anticipation. It was covered in dirt and grime, evidence of its long-forgotten existence. With a gentle hand he wiped it clean, revealing its true shape and size. The bone seemed to tell a story of its own, whispering secrets of a time long past. But as he examined the bone more closely, he realized with growing horror that it was a human's bone. The archaeologist, along with his assistant, had stumbled upon the remains of a human body. According to the police, the remains were found at about 10:15 a.m. on September 3, 1978, several hundred yards northeast of Mound Road in Moan Avenue, on the outskirts of Rockdale. As his discovery sent shockwaves through the dusty landfill in Rockdale, he quickly called the sheriff's office and the authorities were quick to respond. What started as a routine archaeological research in an unincorporated Joliet township turned into a full-blown investigation when a human bone was discovered on the premises. The police, arriving at the scene in a flurry of activity, cordoned off the area to begin their investigation. It was apparent to investigators that they were dealing with a homicide case. It seemed that whoever buried the body underground was trying to conceal it from the world. The remains had been unceremoniously buried, hinting at a cruel and inhumane act. The investigators could tell that the victim had been murdered because only one bone was discovered, which means that the person would have been cut into pieces, and the other body parts would have been scattered at different places, adding a sense of urgency to their work. They were determined to uncover the truth behind this heinous crime, and the hunt for answers had begun. The stakes were high, and the weight of responsibility on their shoulders was immense, but they were ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, prompting law enforcement officials to launch a thorough investigation. Who was the deceased, and how did the person end up buried in the landfill? These were the questions on everyone's mind. The investigation was far from easy. It would take years of tireless work, countless interviews, and the latest scientific breakthroughs to solve the mystery. The officers stood around the partial remains of the body, their eyes locked onto the grisly sight mixed with curiosity and concern. It was clear that something had disturbed the rest of the body, and the officers couldn't help but wonder where the other body parts were. The scene was quickly secured and detectives were called to investigate further. With their experience and expertise, they hope to uncover any additional skeletal remains that might provide vital clues to solving this macabre crime. Amidst the rubble and debris, the investigators painstakingly combed through the construction landfill, the layers of brick, stone, and wood. As they dug deeper, what they discovered became more gruesome and chilling. Skeletal remains, broken and fragmented, emerged from the debris. The source of this debris was traced back to the Rustcraft building, a massive 3-story structure with a full basement that once dominated the Juliet skyline. The investigators knew that they had their work cut out for them as they delved deeper into this bone-chilling discovery. In the world of forensic investigation, pathologists are the skilled professionals who meticulously examine the human body and its tissues to unravel the secrets of death. However, in the case of the unknown remains, authorities take a slightly different approach. Instead of a traditional pathologist examination, the remains undergo an anthropological examination. This fascinating field involves the study of human skeletal remains to determine age, gender, ancestry, and other characteristics that can help piece together the identity of the deceased. With only partial skeletal remains recovered, it was a daunting task to piece together the clues and unravel the secrets. They managed to glean some fascinating insights into the life of these mysterious bone fragments, revealing a glimpse of the past, and perhaps even unlocking some secrets of the person's untimely demise. From just fragments of bones, pathologists were able to put together some fascinating details about the unknown person on October 14, 1997. The bones were of a woman. She was estimated to be in her youth, somewhere between the ages of 15 and 24 years old, with her entire life ahead of her. She stood between 5 and 5 foot 10 inches tall. Despite her incomplete remains, these details allowed them to imagine what this young woman might have been like in life, and spark a sense of curiosity about her untold story. Without any identity to be followed, the person whose bones were found was given the name Rockdale's Jane Doe. Forensic pathologists were unable to determine any other distinguishing features about her appearance. Was she fair-skinned or olive-toned? Did she have auburn hair or jet black locks? The answers to these questions, like the woman herself, were buried in the ground and lost to time. Yet, despite the lack of information, the pathologists remained undaunted in their quest for answers, knowing that even the smallest detail could make all the difference in solving this perplexing case. As the investigators looked towards the timeline of events, a poignant realization dawned upon them. The unknown woman had likely lived and died in the years leading up to the demolition of the Rustcraft building in 1986. What was her life like during those tumultuous years, and what led to her untimely demise? The world around her was changing rapidly, with new technologies, cultural shifts, and political upheavals reshaping the landscape. Was she a witness to these changes, or was she struggling to survive amidst the chaos? As the investigators pondered these questions, they couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness for the woman whose life had ended in such a tragic and mysterious manner. When they dug deeper into the history of the mysterious building, in whose rubble the remains were found, they uncovered a treasure trove of information that left them intrigued. It turns out that this ancient structure had been used by numerous companies since its inception in 1907. It was once a majestic factory, a towering structure, which was struck by disaster in 1992. The flames of a ferocious fire raged through the building for 2 long days, devouring everything in its path. The flames reached high into the sky, licking at the clouds like a vengeful beast, taunting the brave firefighters who fought bravely to contain the inferno. But their efforts were in vain, and the once magnificent factory was reduced to a mere shadow of its former self, a solemn reminder of the destructive power of fire. Before its demise, the factory had become something of a heaven for the local homeless population. The building was far from safe, but for those who had nowhere else to go, it provided shelter from the elements. However, it was also known to be a hotbed of criminal activity, with nefarious characters lurking in the shadows. As the smoke cleared and the ashes settled, the city knew they had to act fast. The once towering factory had become a ticking time bomb, posing a threat to all who ventured near. With heavy hearts, the decision was made to demolish the building, but the question remained what to do with the rubble. A stroke of genius provided a solution that the debris should be carefully cleared, leaving behind a barren wasteland where the factory once stood. However, the remnants of the wreckage were not discarded, but rather repurposed. The basement of the factory was filled with the remains of the building, providing a solid foundation for what would come next. When they investigated further, they learned that in 1995, a curious decision was made to uproot the building's remains and relocate them to a new location in Rockdale, where the bone fragments were found. Their theory that the woman was killed elsewhere and then buried in this spot was confirmed when the pathologist informed them that the body of the unknown woman had been disturbed not once, but twice after death, suggesting that someone had been present at the original factory location. The mystery surrounding the woman's demise only deepened with this disturbing revelation. In 2009, hope emerged when the Will County coroner, Patrick K. O'Neill, formed a dedicated team to bring justice to the forgotten victim. The cold case unit embarked on an arduous journey, meticulously piecing together every detail of the case. Over the years, forensic anthropology studies were conducted. DNA was extracted and entered into the vast National Missing and Unidentified Persons Database, NAMIs, and the profile was tirelessly searched in CODIs, the FBI's combined DNA index system. The team even turned to the latest in FBI technology, commissioning a specialized unit to create a facial reconstruction of the unknown woman. Yet each lead was pursued and ultimately eliminated, leaving the team with more questions than answers. On June 8, 2022, the Will County Coroner's Office teamed up with Othram, a forensic DNA sequencing laboratory, to solve the puzzling cold case of Rockdale's Jane Doe. Armed with cutting-edge technology and a determination to solve this long-standing riddle, the teams set out on their quest. But it wouldn't be easy. Previous attempts at DNA testing had failed, leaving little hope for a breakthrough. However, the Will County Coroner's Office was undeterred and even contributed funding to support the new round of testing. With advanced forensic DNA testing at their disposal, the team was determined to crack the case once and for all. And with the help of a crowdfund campaign that raised additional funds and support from the community, the team was finally able to move forward with their investigation. The stakes were high, and the pressure was on, but the team was ready to do whatever it took to bring closure to this long-standing mystery. Kristen Middleman, the Chief Development Officer at Othram, knew the importance of identifying the perpetrators or victims of a crime. And that's exactly what Othram was able to do in this case. The experts at Othram were determined to crack the case, and they knew that advanced DNA testing was the key to unlocking the mystery of the unknown woman's identity. Through forensic-grade genome sequencing technology, they were able to extract key genetic information from the skeletal remains, enabling them to construct a comprehensive genealogical profile. But that was just the beginning. With dogged determination, the Othram's in-house genetic genealogy team then took over, tirelessly researching the family tree to create an investigative lead for law enforcement. Their dedication paid off, and the breakthrough they were hoping for finally emerged. The lab was able to uncover a match of possible relatives, providing the veteran investigators with a crucial lead. It was the moment they had been waiting for, the break in the case that could finally bring some closure to this unsolvable mystery. The investigation was far from over, but this breakthrough gave them renewed hope. Once the leads were returned to law enforcement, cold case investigators interviewed several people in Illinois, Texas, and California. After years of painstaking investigation, the answers finally came to them. Othram's advanced DNA testing had led them to a man in California named Christ O'Brien, who they believed could be the key to unlocking the mystery of the unidentified woman. Cold case investigators from the coroner's office quickly made their way to his house and interviewed him, and discovered that he had a sister who he had not seen since 1984. Could this missing sister be the unidentified woman they had been searching for all these years? To answer this question, they collected DNA from Christ O'Brien and sent it to the Othram labs for further testing, and the subsequent KINSNP testing confirmed that Christ and the identified woman were half-siblings. His long-lost sister had finally been found, thanks to the tireless efforts of law enforcement and the cutting-edge technology of Othram. On March 3, 2023, after 26 years of being a nameless victim in a cold case, the woman who had been found in the ruins of an Illinois factory in 1997 finally had a name: Marie R. O'Brien. Born in the charming town of Aurora on July 16, 1966, Marie was a daughter, sister, and friend to those who knew her. Elder brother Christ O'Brien was someone she looked up to and loved dearly. And though her life was tragically cut short, Marie's memory will now live on with dignity and warmth, as her loved ones can finally lay her to rest with a sense of closure. Marie R. O'Brien was a bright and cheerful student at Golden Rule Charter School, where her outgoing nature and friendly demeanor earned her many friends. Her trusting nature, however, often raised concern among those who cared about her. Her elder brother Christ O'Brien described her by saying that she often placed her trust in random strangers too easily, a trait that may have ultimately led to her tragic fate. Despite her brother's efforts to contact her after 1984, Marie disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a void in the lives of those who knew her. Marie R. O'Brien may have been a woman of few words, but her actions spoke volumes. Her community in Aurora knew her as a true gem, a kind-hearted soul who always put others first. From a young age, Marie's talents were evident to all. She was a creative force, and her passion for art was undeniable. Her paintings were breathtaking, and were cherished by all who received them. But Marie's generosity extended far beyond her artistic talents. She was always willing to lend a helping hand, and her selfless nature was an inspiration to all those around her. It's no wonder that she was so well loved by her friends and family, who couldn't get enough of her infectious warmth and charming personality. Though her time was tragically cut short, Marie's legacy lives on through the lives she touched with her kindness and creativity. But the case is not yet solved. There are questions that still linger in the minds of Marie's loved ones. Who took her away from them? As they wait for justice to be served, they hold on to hope that the perpetrator will be caught and closure will finally be within reach. For Christ, Marie's older brother, the wait has been agonizing. Every day he wonders who could have done this to his beloved sister and why, but he remains determined to see the case through to its end, to bring peace to Maria's memory and justice to her name. The search for answers continues, and the family's faith in the investigative team never wavers. Stephanie Newman was born on June 3, 1967, in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Stephanie grew up in a Jewish family led by her parents, Louis Herman Newman, and his wife, Annie. She had 2 siblings. Philadelphia is known for its significant historical, cultural, and artistic contributions. A quieter life away from the city's hustle and bustle. Stephanie was raised in Elkins Park, a suburb north of Philadelphia, where she quickly showed herself to be both beautiful and intelligent. At a young age, she began studying the Torah, the compilation of books that contain Jewish law and heritage, and she performed public readings which require very specific intonations. Stephanie was active, extroverted, and sociable, never one to stay still, according to those close to her. At 16, she started working as a counselor at a girls' summer camp during her summer break. It was there she met Craig Rabinowitz, who worked at a nearby boys' camp. Craig, born on September 28, 1963, was 4 years older than Stephanie. Little is known about his early life, except that he was the son of an executive at a prominent clothing manufacturer. Craig frequently visited Stephanie's camp due to his responsibilities, and they started talking. Eventually, he asked her out, and although she was initially hesitant, something changed after their second date. From then on, the couple became inseparable, maintaining their relationship for 7 years. Stephanie's romance did not affect her academic performance. She was diligent in her studies, graduating from high school with a National Merit Scholarship. She went on to earn a degree from Bryn Mawr College, a private women's liberal arts college. After graduating, she enrolled at Temple University to study law. Craig finished high school as an average student, excelling in sports like ice hockey and baseball. He also attended Temple University but dropped out after his first semester. After their long courtship, Stephanie and Craig married in June 1990. With the help of Stephanie's parents, they moved into an apartment. Stephanie's new role as a wife did not hinder her academic pursuits, and she graduated from law school in 1992 with excellent grades. Around the same time, Craig and a friend started a company called CNC Vending, which imported latex gloves for medical use from Malaysia. The company made a few sales before dissolving, but Craig continued in the same business, registering a new company called CNC Supplies. He explained to his in-laws and friends that he would import containers of gloves from Malaysia to sell wholesale, estimating a 33% profit margin. To maximize profits, he needed $88,000 to import 4 containers. The figures he presented were impressive, and he easily convinced Stephanie's parents, one of her brothers, and some friends to invest in the business. While Craig seemed headed for success, Stephanie was also making strides. After graduating, she took the bar exam, a challenging test for law graduates to practice in the United States. Stephanie passed on her first attempt, and combined with her excellent grades, this did not go unnoticed. She quickly received an attractive job offer from a prestigious law firm with a salary she couldn't refuse. Stephanie had clear dreams and aimed to own a home in a good neighborhood. After 4 years of marriage, the couple moved in with her parents to save money for a down payment on their first house. This dream came true when they moved into a cozy 2-story home in Marion, on Philadelphia's main line. This upper-middle-class neighborhood was home to professionals, bankers, executives, and entrepreneurs, many of whom were part of the local Jewish community. With a new life goal achieved, Stephanie's dreams were nearly complete. She only needed a child to crown them. It wasn't long before this wish came true with the arrival of a healthy and beautiful baby girl named Haley Sarah Rabinowitz. To everyone, they seemed like the perfect family. Stephanie, a promising lawyer with a rising career, Craig, a businessman owning an import company, and their lovely daughter completing the picture. Neighbors had no complaints, often seeing Craig strolling around with Haley in her stroller. But this perfect life was short-lived. As we often see, perfect lives rarely exist, and what appeared to be Stephanie's dream fulfillment soon came to an end. On Tuesday, April 29th, 1997, Stephanie and her mother went out in the morning to shop for Haley's first birthday preparations. That evening, Craig, Stephanie, and the baby had dinner at a luxurious Thai restaurant with Stephanie's parents, Lou and Annie. After a delightful meal, they all returned home, with some accounts suggesting everyone went to Craig's house. Upon arrival, Craig mentioned he had too much coffee and felt jittery, so he decided to take Haley for a walk in her stroller. When he returned, his in-laws had already left. After putting Haley to bed, Stephanie and Craig had a beer in the living room before Stephanie went upstairs to take a bath. Meanwhile, Craig stayed downstairs watching a hockey game featuring the local team, the Flyers. Around midnight on April 29, 1997, Craig made a frantic 911 call, reporting an accident. He claimed his wife had fallen in the bathtub and he found her unconscious and couldn't revive her. Minutes later, the first police officers arrived at the Rabinowitz house, finding the door open and announcing their presence as they entered. They heard Craig's shouts from upstairs and found him holding Stephanie's head above water while her body was submerged in the bathtub. The officers helped lift Stephanie from the tub and attempted resuscitation, trying to restore her consciousness. The commotion woke Haley, who began to cry, and the police told Craig to attend to her. Craig soon returned with Haley in his arms as the paramedics arrived to take over. Stephanie was still unconscious, her body cold and blue. The police informed Craig he needed to come with them, but he was unsure what to do with the baby. At that moment, neighbors, noticing the police activity, offered to stay with Haley. An officer questioned Craig about what happened, and he explained that after dinner with his in-laws, he had a drink with his wife, who then went for a bath to relax since she had trouble sleeping. He stayed watching the hockey game but heard a thud from the bathroom that sounded like a shampoo bottle falling. Not concerned at first, as this often happened to Stephanie, he eventually went to check after she didn't return for over half an hour. He found her unconscious and fully submerged in the water, tried to revive her, and when he couldn't, called 911. He opened the front door for the responders and held her head above water as he couldn't lift her from the tub. Craig's clothes were wet, so the officer advised him to change. Meanwhile, the officer noticed the tub draining, likely dislodged when they moved Stephanie's body. He replaced the plug, aware the scene needed preservation for any potential investigation. The officer also recalled the bathroom floor was completely dry, with no water outside the tub, something that stuck in his mind. After changing clothes, Craig was taken to the hospital where Stephanie had been transported. He was informed that despite their efforts, Stephanie was declared dead at 1:29 a.m. Overwhelmed, Craig held his head, repeatedly saying he couldn't believe it and expressed he couldn't go through such loss again, referencing his father's death from cancer 3 years earlier. Craig then faced the daunting task of notifying family and friends about the tragic accident. When Stephanie's parents arrived at the hospital and confirmed her death, Annie collapsed in her husband's arms. They soon began asking when Stephanie's body would be released, as Jewish tradition requires burial as soon as possible, preferably within 24 hours. However, they faced a significant problem. The certifying doctor deemed an autopsy necessary, finding it unusual for a healthy 29-year-old woman to die from a bathtub fall without any visible injuries. This not only delayed the burial but also conflicted with their religious customs, which prohibit desecration of the deceased's body. Additionally, this delayed the period known as Shiva, the 7-day mourning period observed by family members who stay at home, refrain from any form of entertainment, and even cover mirrors to show they are not concerned with their physical appearance. The coroner's stance was firm and unyielding, forcing the family to accept it. The autopsy took place in the morning, conducted by the county's deputy medical examiner. By the time the doctor examined Stephanie's body, 12 hours had passed since the emergency was reported. At that time, the situation had changed considerably. The experienced coroner first noticed petechial hemorrhages, small red spots that appear when tiny blood vessels bleed internally. These can be caused by certain illnesses, prolonged effort, medication, or criminal actions like asphyxiation. In Stephanie's case, petechiae were present around her eyes, and that wasn't all her body revealed. As time passed, deep bruises became visible on both sides of her neck and under her jaw. Additionally, she had bruises on her arms and legs, particularly around her knees and elbows. These injuries were difficult to explain as the result of a simple fall in the bathtub. Moreover, the stomach contents examination showed undigested food, suggesting that death occurred around 9:30 p.m., more than 2 hours before Craig called emergency services. At this point, the only suspect for any potential wrongdoing against Stephanie was her husband, as he had assured the police that only he, his wife, and their baby were home, with all doors and windows securely locked. Another detail noted by the first responding officer was that Stephanie was in the bathtub wearing all her jewelry, which is unusual for someone taking a bath. When she was removed from the tub, she was still wearing her earrings, 2 gold bracelets, one with stones, her wedding ring, and even a gold watch. This, along with the dry bathroom floor, didn't match Craig's story about his supposed efforts to lift her from the tub. The authorities quickly launched an investigation, re-inspecting the Rabinowitz residence and confirming nothing was stolen and there were no signs of forced entry. During the search, they found a bottle of zolpidem, a medication used for treating sleep problems. Craig stated that both he and his wife had been prescribed this medication due to their sleeping issues. Once the post-mortem studies were completed, Stephanie's body was released to her family for burial, which took place at Mount Lebanon Cemetery. While the family was still grappling with their loss, another shocking event occurred. Just hours after the funeral, Craig was arrested as a suspect in his wife's death. In the following months, Stephanie's parents offered $75,000 for Craig's bail, but some sources claim the bail was set at $5 million. The case took another twist when the police received an anonymous tip suggesting they look into Delilah's Den, a luxurious local gentleman's club, for information on Craig. Following this lead, investigators searched the Rabinowitz residence, finding a hidden space in a closet ceiling with a movable panel. Inside, they discovered several men's magazines, a bag full of receipts, and what appeared to be a handwritten ledger. To make sense of the documents, the investigators called in a certified public accountant to organize and interpret the vast amount of financial data. While these studies were ongoing, detectives pursued the anonymous tip at Delilah's Denver. There, they learned that Craig was a well-known regular, frequenting not only the general services but also the exclusive champagne room, where dancers performed personalized sessions. It became evident that Craig had a particular affinity for an exotic dancer named Summer, whose real name was Shannon Reinert, a 24-year-old who lived with her 2 children. Shannon was located and questioned, confirming Craig was a frequent client who bought her gifts, including jewelry and furniture for her home. She admitted they had met outside the club but insisted their relationship was purely platonic, involving companionship rather than intimacy. Shannon revealed that Craig had confided in her about marital problems, saying he cared for Stephanie but no longer loved her, adding that leaving her would bankrupt him. Additionally, it was discovered that on the night of Stephanie's death, Craig had called Shannon to inform her of his wife's passing, a call that deeply saddened the dancer. But these discoveries paled in comparison to the revelations of the public accountant who examined the papers found at the Rabinowitz house. According to bank and credit card records, in the 9 months before the incident, Craig had spent a staggering $156,000 at the Gentlemen's Club. From January to April 1997 alone, he incurred $29,000 in charges at Delilah's Den, with an average of 3 visits per week, spending over $2,000 weekly. Craig's gifts to Shannon included not only furniture for her living room, dining room, and nursery, worth about $8,500, but also expensive presents like a Tiffany's pearl necklace costing over $1,900, which he did not give to his wife on Valentine's Day. Additionally, Craig had purchased 2 memberships to an exclusive sports club for himself and Shannon, each costing $365, plus $136 monthly for laundry services, shoe polishing, and lockers in the VIP section. He also spent a small fortune on fine clothing for his favorite dancer. Contrary to Shannon's claim that there was no intimate relationship, Craig's bank records showed frequent stays at 5-star hotels, averaging $500 per night, always registering with Shannon and using the rooms for only a few hours. Moreover, with all the money Craig was squandering, one would assume his latex glove import business was thriving. But investigations revealed that the company had conducted transactions between 1990 and 1992, but no activity was recorded thereafter. No contracts, no purchases, no sales. In short, the business didn't exist. So where did all the money come from? It turned out Craig had been running a Ponzi scheme, named after Charles Ponzi, who famously carried out such a plan in the 1920s in the United States until it was discovered. This pyramid scheme involves promising investors good returns from legitimate economic activities, but these returns are paid from the funds of new investors. Craig had drawn in Stephanie's family, friends, and others. Initially, things went well because Stephanie earned a good salary. However, after giving birth, she wanted to spend time with the baby and arranged with her law firm to reduce her workload, resulting in a proportional decrease in income, amounting to only $33,000 annually at the time of the incident, insufficient to sustain the couple's lifestyle. This also made Craig's lavish tastes and financial maneuvers unsustainable. He was aware of the high probability of his schemes being exposed. In a final move, following Haley's birth, Craig took out 2 insurance policies. One for Stephanie worth over $1.5 million, and another for himself worth $1.6 million. These policies were in addition to Stephanie's coverage from her law firm, which insured her for $500,000 and her husband for $150,000. According to the accountant's analysis, the calculations were simple, written in Craig's handwriting. In the event of Stephanie's death, Craig would receive over $2 million. This amount would allow him to settle about $700,000 in debts to his investors and keep around $1.5 million. He planned to retain $400,000 and place $1 million in a bank account whose interest would yield over $60,000 annually, allowing him to live comfortably. Shortly after his wife's death, Craig pawned several of her jewelry pieces, including her wedding ring, obtaining $2,200. Additionally, it was reported that he pawned jewelry inherited by Stephanie from her great-grandmother shortly after her death. Moreover, the papers stored by Craig showed that the couple had bought their house 2 years earlier for $230,000, but had since taken out 2 mortgages totaling $300,500, along with some loans from friends. In the second half of 1997, a preliminary hearing was held to determine if there was enough evidence to prosecute Craig for his wife's death. The case was presented by the first assistant district attorney, who explained the Ponzi scheme and how, at the time of the incident, Craig knew his lies were unsustainable. According to the prosecution, one theory was that Stephanie was sedated with a triple dose of Ambien, a medication prescribed only to Craig. Based on bruises found on Stephanie's right side, one hypothesis was that she died elsewhere in the house and was dragged up the stairs to be placed in the bathtub. Another possibility was that after administering an excessive dose of the sleep medication, Craig carried her to the bathroom to drown her in the tub once she fell asleep. He undressed the body, forgetting to remove the jewelry, and placed her in the water. Possibly, the contact with the water woke Stephanie, causing her to struggle, prompting her husband to strangle her. A process that likely took about 4.5 minutes. During the struggle, she likely injured her elbows and knees against the sides of the tub. The prosecutor revealed that a book about mortuary topics was found on Craig's nightstand, which stated that only 13% of deaths are subject to autopsy. This led him to believe that, coupled with religious considerations, the odds were in his favor, prompting him to take a calculated risk, not anticipating an unyielding coroner. It was also discovered that Craig planned to flee after his wife's funeral, as a suitcase with thousands of dollars in cash was found in the trunk of his car. Court documents revealed that years earlier, Craig had been detained during an investigation into a prostitution ring in Philadelphia but received immunity in exchange for his testimony in a 1993 trial, already married to Stephanie. Meanwhile, Craig's defense tried to bring up a supposed man who had knocked on a neighbor's door asking for directions. But the police confirmed that Craig was the only man at the Rabinowitz house, something he had himself affirmed, and there were no signs of forced entry. The calculations in Craig's handwritten ledger about what he would receive upon his wife's death and how he would spend it left no doubt that the act was premeditated. The revelations during this process left Stephanie's family and friends in shock. The attorney representing Stephanie's parents, Louis and Annie, read a statement saying they were overwhelmed by the information uncovered. They believed they knew Craig, but it was clear they had been deceived, just like everyone else he had spoken to. Friends and family thought he was a wonderful husband and father. They had even helped with nearly $100,000 for his so-called import business. The prosecution maintained that Craig's situation had reached a breaking point. His credit cards were maxed out, the house was overmortgaged, and friends and family expected returns from his non-existent business. Admitting the truth would mean his life was destroyed. Instead, ending his wife's life would allow him to clear his debts and fulfill his fantasy with Summer. Later, Craig's defense attempted to have the fraud and murder charges tried separately, but this was not accepted. The trial was set to begin on October 30th, 1997. When the trial date arrived, unfortunately, Lewis, Stephanie's father, had passed away a month earlier and could not be present. On the first day of the hearing, everything changed. Craig pleaded guilty to killing his wife to obtain the insurance money. Shaking and sobbing, he claimed he decided to confess after a dream where his wife, father, and father-in-law approached him, placing their hands on his shoulders, telling him it was time to do the right thing. He added that he couldn't subject his family and his 17-month-old daughter to such a painful process. Before finishing his statement, he admitted that his life had become a sham, a counterfeit, and a fraud, and the hole he was digging grew deeper and deeper. What was right became wrong and vice versa. He added that his life was on a slippery, steep path and he had no excuses to offer. Following his statement, the judge sentenced Craig Rabinowitz, 34, to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder of his wife, Stephanie Rabinowitz. According to his prison records last updated on May 15, 2024, Craig remains incarcerated at the State Correctional Institution in Pennsylvania. In his mugshot taken in October 2022, at 58 years old and with a shaved head, he no longer looked as glamorous as in 1997. He is now 60 years old. Further details emerged during the investigations, such as the couple's return to Louis and Annie's home supposedly to save money for their dream house. In reality, they had been evicted from their apartment and were being sued for $6,000 plus legal fees, a debt Stephanie's parents eventually paid. Beyond the financial details lies the reality of Haley Sarah, who grew up with a father in prison and a deceased mother. She turned one the day her mother was buried and had to adjust to a new environment, new faces, and arms different from her mother's warm and loving embrace. Stephanie's maternal grandparents took care of Haley, and after her husband's death, Annie received family support to help shoulder the responsibility. Financial provisions were made for Haley's future. The funeral announcement requested contributions to an account in her name. Stephanie's law firm also established a trust fund for her. The house where the tragedy occurred, which became a site of curiosity for journalists and locals, sold easily in just 4 weeks for $225,000, only $5,000 less than they paid in 1995, but about $25,000 below market value due to its dark past. The sale proceeds were used entirely to pay off the mortgages on the property. In a twist of justice, Stephanie's life insurance money, which Craig had planned to use to solve his problems, was placed in a trust for Haley's future. A year after the incident, Philadelphia Weekly interviewed Craig in prison. He claimed Stephanie made him feel controlled and emasculated, describing her as overly orderly and rule-bound, while he preferred going with the flow, suggesting Stephanie was practically to blame for her own death. He also stated that if released, the first thing he would do is find Shannon. However, it seemed Shannon did not share his passion, as he reportedly wrote to her several times without receiving a response. Despite everything, it is clear that Stephanie was a wonderful, intelligent young woman who dreamed of marrying a good partner, having a home, and raising a baby. Yet Craig's selfishness, ambition, and lust turned these dreams into a nightmare, not just for Stephanie's loved ones, but also for their own daughter. The Inman family projected an image of perfect harmony to those on the outside. They were regular churchgoers every Sunday to Warwickport Sing. Yet within their tight-knit circle one could fathom what really happened behind closed doors. Back in 3, William and Sandra Inman's paths crossed at church. He was 18, she just 16. Their union received their parents' blessing, leading to marriage. The couple made their home in the modest community of Logan. Located in Hocking County, Bill Inman possessed strong religious convictions and balanced his job in construction with playing musical instruments for the Sky of Faith Evangelical Church in Nelsonville, Ohio. Sandra took on the role of managing the household. In 1984, they were delighted to welcome their son, William Jr., to distinguish between father and son. The head of the family was called Bill, while the younger one was known as Will. As time passed, William Jr. grew up. At age 17 in 2001, he met a 15-year-old named Summer Cook at church, quite reminiscent of his parents' encounter. Will and Summer maintained a friendship for 3 years before getting married when Summer turned 18 in 2004. The newlyweds began their life together by residing with Will's parents in a spacious house in Logan, Ohio. In that same year, when Bill reached the age of 39, he envisioned himself as a spiritual guide. Transforming his garage into a makeshift sanctuary, he began hosting gatherings there. Despite local skepticism towards the self-declared minister's actions, his enigmatic garage started to attract neighbors first, then their friends, and more individuals seeking solace through prayer and leaving offerings. By 2005, Will and Summer were overjoyed with the birth of their son Alex. Around this time, financial strains began affecting the Inman household since Bill's religious endeavors were not financially rewarding. This situation led the family to consider relocating to another state in pursuit of better employment opportunities. By 2006, the Inman family had fully resettled in Florida. Both Bill and Will promptly secured employment in hotel construction. Meanwhile, Sandra and Summer dedicated themselves to homemaking and nurturing young Alex. 2 years later, the Inmans made their way back to Ohio from Florida. By then, they had forfeited their Logan home due to an inability to reclaim it and settled in a rental in Vinton's countryside. Starting a new chapter shortly after their relocation, in 2008, and Summer welcomed their second child, a daughter named Kelly. By 2010, their family grew with the arrival of another daughter, Alana. As young parents, Will and Summer often sought weekends away for relaxation and rejuvenation. During these times, Bill and Sandra, always supportive, took on the role of caring for their grandchildren. The weekends were filled with joy as they cherished moments with their 3 grandchildren. In the spring of 2010, Bill Inman secured a pastor's license and proclaimed himself the head of the Skinner Faith Church. Alongside his wife, he established a charitable entity named Ranch of Mercy to assist the jobless and homeless. His vision was grand. He wanted to construct a large dwelling for orphans and widows. However, financial resources were quite lacking. To address this issue, Bill conceived a lottery scheme. Each participant would purchase a ticket with proceeds earmarked for building the shelter. The grand prize was either a house or $200,000 plus 99 other significant rewards. The community became aware of this lottery through news and advertisements. Bill initially promoted it door to door, assuring participants of lavish rewards while emphasizing that surplus funds were destined for providing a haven for the destitute. Priced at $10 per ticket, Bill managed to sell 100,000 tickets, amassing $1 million for the project. The drawing was set for September 2010. In June 2010, personal upheaval struck the Inman family when Summer expressed her desire to divorce Will after 6 years of marriage. This declaration came not long after she had penned a significant entry in her personal diary. "I am utterly exhausted from constantly trying to please everyone around me. Do not deserve happiness. Do I not have the right to love someone and feel that love in return? I'm uncertain if now is the appropriate time, but I feel compelled to share everything with Will. Troubles me deeply, yet he deserves to know the truth. He should be aware that I no longer wish to be with him. I need to be alone to rediscover myself and understand my current identity. At this moment, I feel like a servant, perpetually running around and obeying others' commands. I adore my children with all my heart and would never trade them for anything. However, I don't want them to grow up witnessing their mother merely following orders all the time. I'm unsure how Will might react to this revelation. There's a chance he could become angry, attempt to take the children away, or worse, resort to threats or harm. It's important for our children to see us as equals. I'm aware that Will's parents might turn against me and try to convince me to stay, but such actions won't change anything. Last night, when Will asked me what I wanted, my mind was blank. All I could think of was what I don't want. I don't want to feel unhappy and trapped any longer, but I couldn't bring myself to voice these thoughts. So instead, I sat there in silence. Every day feels like a battle. All I yearn for is rest, to cry and sleep without interruption. But finding a way out of the situation seems impossible at times. My hope is that by the time of my next journal entry, I'll have clarity on how to resolve everything. As the summer progressed, we moved forward with the divorce proceedings. Departing from the Inman residence, I took our son and both daughters along with my personal belongings. We sought refuge at my parents' home. Wanting not to disrupt the children's relationship with their father or grandparents, visits were scheduled regularly for them. 2 months following our separation in August 2010, I began a relationship with Adam Peters while also securing employment at a bank in Logan's downtown area, working in a cleaning capacity due to limited educational background. When September arrived, it marked another significant event, the Ranch of Mercy's house raffle, spearheaded by the Inman family. Although construction on the prize house was supposed to begin, both September and October passed without any progress. No raffle took place, and no explanations were given. The organization didn't seem to rush to refund participants either. By December 1, 2010, the Inmans got a notice requiring them to leave their rented residence due to significant unpaid rent. In response, Summer and Adam went to collect her remaining belongings from the Inman home. However, they were denied entry. This led Summer to call the police, reporting that her estranged husband was intimidating her and preventing her from retrieving her possessions. When the police arrived, and his parents continued to block access, Will even escalated matters by threatening Adam and clashing with an officer. Consequently, Summer filed a legal complaint against Will. She reflected on their relationship, recalling how idyllic it seemed before marriage, but lamenting its drastic change afterward. Will's behavior reportedly became very controlling, affecting everything from her diet to household responsibilities and even intimate aspects of their life. She wasn't allowed to sleep without his approval and was confined at home without access to her phone or keys. Summer revealed Will's aspirations for a large family, his interest in polygamy, and his activities on related websites, including posting inappropriate images. She also disclosed threats he made if she pursued divorce, and mentioned how her cats mysteriously disappeared, attributed their disappearance nonchalantly to them escaping through an open window. Following Summer's allegations, Will provided his version of events. He justified taking Summer's phone and keys by suggesting he suspected her of infidelity. Regarding the cats, he said that due to their wild behavior and damage caused to furniture and family members, he relocated them to a shelter. As a result of these conflicts and accusations, Will was subjected to a restraining order, preventing him from approaching Summer and faced penalties and probation amidst further investigations. A fierce battle for custody emerged between the families. The Inmans filed police report against Adam Peters, labeling him a potential threat to the safety of Alex Kelly and Alana. Tragically, Summer's life took a dark turn. On the night March 22, 2011, Summerman, just 25 years old, was finishing her shift at the bank. She wrapped up her cleaning duties after the office had closed. Around 11 p.m., she stepped outside to dispose of the trash. Summer had texted her partner Adam to meet her after work, but he didn't find her by 11:30 p.m. Worried, Adam arrived at the bank and began his search. He discovered her personal items scattered near a dumpster in an alley. Her phone, keys, and a music player still playing with headphones nearby in the grass. Her jacket lay there too. Alarmed, Adam immediately contacted Summer's parents to inform them of her disappearance and stressed the need to alert the police swiftly. Initially, Summer's parents called the bank, guessing she might have stayed longer for extra work and misplaced her belongings. Security personnel had no clues about her whereabouts. They then contacted Logan police to report Summer missing, emphasizing her punctuality and that she rarely stayed late at work. Police arrived at the scene, where they found Summer's belongings. They heard accounts from 3 eyewitnesses, who saw her abduction about an hour earlier. 2 women out for an evening jog reported seeing Summer as she threw out the trash. At that moment, a white Ford Crown Victoria, driven by a blonde woman, approached. 2 individuals dressed in black balaclavas exited the vehicle and forcefully grabbed Summer, shoving her into the back seat, despite her resistance and cries for help. One bystander's attempt to intervene was thwarted when the female driver incapacitated him with pepper spray, forcing him to retreat. The car quickly left the area. The 2 jogging witnesses immediately headed to the nearest police station to report what they had witnessed. Their account initially faced skepticism from the police, who found their narrative peculiar and doubted its authenticity. Expecting it might be a fabricated story. The police reached the abduction site of Summer Inman just an hour after her parents filed the missing person report. However, initial efforts did not lead to locating the missing 25-year-old. News of Summerman's kidnapping quickly circulated through all local media outlets, capturing the community's attention. Hundreds of Logan's residents united in a concerted effort to locate her. As 3 days elapsed, the possibility of finding Summer safe and sound grew increasingly faint. Throughout this harrowing time, her parents endeavored to maintain hope against despairing thoughts. Shortly before her disappearance, Summer Inman shared a photo on Facebook featuring herself, her new partner Adam, and her children. The image portrayed them as a content family unit. Will Inman, who had access to Adam Peters' Facebook page, surprisingly still on his friends list despite being Summer's current partner, noticed this update. It raises an intriguing question. Why would a husband befriend his wife's new companion? The backstory revealed that Adam, a man without stable employment, had been hired by the Inmans a year earlier, in spring 2010, for various household tasks. It was then that Adam and Summer crossed paths and developed a bond. Despite initial reluctance, Summer eventually reciprocated Adam's affections. Her diary entry reflects this internal conflict. My mind screamed, "Run! Get out of here now." But instead I stayed and let him embrace me and then delve deeper. I am very sorry about this. I am guilty. This encounter signified the unraveling of Summer's life within the Inman family. Yearning for happiness and love, she initiated divorce proceedings which were prolonged 5 days before vanishing. Will tested the proposed spousal support per child monthly, suggesting a reduction to $50, given his annual earnings of just $6,000. Will and his parents sought full custody of the children, but their petition was rejected by the court. After losing contact with their grandchildren, Bill and Sandra visibly deteriorated. They lost weight and were clearly affected, as those who knew them concurred that the grandchildren were the light of their lives. In March 2011, amidst the investigation into Summer's disappearance, the Inman family was located. They were found at the residence of Bill's 70-year-old mother in Jackson, Ohio. Bill, Sandra, and Will collectively asserted their ignorance regarding Summer's abduction. The Inmans recounted that on the night of Summer's kidnapping, they were en route to Cleveland to view a new property. However, they encountered car trouble after 3 hours on the road, leading to an overnight ordeal of vehicular repairs on the roadside before returning to Logan the next morning. They maintained that their interactions with Summer were generally amicable with infrequent disputes. Yet they attributed a shift in their familial harmony to Adam Peters' employment in their household, describing this phase as challenging. The trio consistently portrayed Adam as a negative influence, alleging he was the catalyst for the disintegration of their previously harmonious and tightly knit family. The investigation took a crucial turn when police noticed a white Ford Crown Victoria at the Inman family's residence. Upon inspection of the vehicle, a GPS receiver was confiscated. Subsequent examination revealed that on March 22nd, the day Summer was abducted, this car was in Logan. The GPS was deactivated at 5:30 p.m. that evening and reactivated the next morning again in Logan, contradicting the Inman's claim of traveling to Cleveland. Phone records further corroborated that all 3 family members were in Logan on both March 22nd and 23rd. Additional inquiries revealed that on the morning of March 23rd, around 7:30 a.m., the Inmans were at a car wash engaging in a thorough interior cleaning of the vehicle. Bill, Sandra, and Will were all present, but Summer was notably absent following this event. They visited an auto shop in Cleveland for a tire change. While there, a shop employee noticed something odd. Bill was choosing to replace nearly new tires with used ones, simply because he didn't like his current set changed. There was also evidence that the Inmans attempted to modify the car's appearance. Notably, Bill had removed a police spotlight that had previously been mounted on the driver's side door, next to the mirror. Bill, Sandra, and Will Inman were apprehended and brought in for interrogation. Prior to their arrest, Bill assured his elderly mother of their innocence, attributing the situation to a test from the devil. Throughout the questioning, they consistently claimed they were unaware of Summer Inman's abduction and didn't know who the kidnapper was. However, after several hours and faced with the possibility of capital punishment if convicted, Sandra Inman's resolve faltered. Eventually, she disclosed the truth. Sandra confessed that they were responsible for Summer's abduction on the night of March 22nd. She detailed how Bill and Will had disguised themselves in black masks. Sandra admitted that her initial plan was merely to abduct and intimidate Summer. However, events took an unexpected and tragic turn. According to Sandra's confession, when Summer was forcibly placed in the car's back seat, Will restrained her with plastic ties around her neck, hands, and feet, intending merely to frighten her into granting him access to their children. As the situation escalated, Will realized that Summer was on the brink of unconsciousness. He panicked and desperately searched for a knife to release her, shouting frantically to his mother, "Oh my God, Mom, where's the knife? I can't find it." Amidst their collective fear and desperate search for the knife, the situation worsened. Summer ceased breathing and tragically passed away. Sandra maintained that their objective was never to take Summer's life. They merely sought a resolution to their custody dispute and hoped to ensure regular visits with their grandchildren. On March 29, 2011, a week after the kidnapping, Sandra Inman disclosed the location of the body. Summer's remains were found in a septic tank on the grounds of Skinnier Faith Church near Nelsonville, about 30 kilometers from her workplace. Bill Inman had been involved in the church's construction. This place held personal significance for him and Sandra, as it was where they had married 28 years earlier. The Inmans were regulars at this church. Bill participated in its musical ensemble, Police uncovered the well by removing a concrete slab and unscrewing 6 bolts from the metal lid. When they opened it, they immediately saw Summer's legs. She had been thrown headfirst into the septic tank. Still wearing her work attire, her black t-shirt bore an ironic inscription, "I don't have anger issues, I have issues with idiots." A forensic examination confirmed that Summer had succumbed to strangulation. Apart from marks on her neck, hands, and legs indicating she'd been restrained, no other injuries were found on her body. This highlighted strangulation as the cause of her tragic demise. Sandra revealed that she originally planned to dispose of the body in a river, but reconsidered and decided it would be safer to conceal it in the well near the church. She believed this location would ensure it remained undiscovered for a long time. Sandra admitted to feeling deep shame for her actions and their irreversible consequences. During the subsequent trial, 49-year-old Bill Inman and 28-year-old Will Inman did not take any responsibility for Summer's death. Throughout the proceedings, they stayed mostly silent, showing no visible emotions and avoiding eye contact with Summer's grieving parents. Sandra Inman, at 47 years old, stood out as the only family member who accepted responsibility for her part in the tragic events. She maintained that the plan to intimidate Summer was entirely her own idea. In a deeply emotional moment before sentencing, Sandra, overcome with tears, faced Summer's parents and begged for their forgiveness. Her speech, though broken by sobs and a quivering voice, clearly expressed remorse. Sandra admitted she saw Summer as a daughter and regretted her catastrophic decision. In 2012, the verdict was handed down. All 3 members of the Inman family were convicted. Bill and Will Inman received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Sandra Inman also got a life sentence but with eligibility for parole after serving 15 years. However, among friends and church members familiar with the family's dynamics, doubts arose about Sandra being the mastermind behind the crime. It was commonly known that Bill had a dominant role in the family and usually made final decisions on all matters. Will, on his part, was seen as a pampered child whose desires were always met by his parents. Those close to the family speculated that Sandra's confession might have been a strategic move to reduce legal consequences for her husband and son. Currently, Alex and Alana are being raised by Summer's family. For quite some time, it was hard to explain to these grandchildren where their mother, father, grandmother, and grandfather had gone. Leonard Taylor was born in the United States in the mid-1960s. He was the son of Jesse, who also had another son identified as Perry Taylor. In the late 1980s, Leonard met a girl named Mia Perry, with whom he became romantically involved. Around this time, Leonard began to accumulate a criminal record. Initially, he was convicted on charges related to narcotics and concealed weapons in San Bernardino County and spent time behind bars, though the length of his sentence remains unclear. In September 1990, a 19-year-old man was fatally attacked following an argument in an apartment complex located in the same county. By then, Leonard, who had been released, was living in that area. Due to his criminal record, he became one of the primary suspects in the case, but managed to avoid any responsibility. As part of his scheme to evade justice, he used a false name, Michael Chambers. The following year, in 1991, Mia became pregnant. The news of his first child did not motivate Leonard to change his ways. During this time, he was arrested by the Drug Enforcement Administration and convicted for transporting and selling narcotics, leading to his incarceration in a federal prison. Since his daughter was born amid these circumstances, he was unable to be present with Mia during the birth. Facing reality, Mia named the baby on her own and prepared to raise her child independently. Soon after, what people thought became true. Leonard's connection seemed less likely with his newborn when, in 1992, he was found guilty of statutory rape and child abuse in San Diego County. While in prison, he disclosed to a local media outlet that he maintained connections with some scammers involved in irregularities related to corporate check frauds. Upon his release, Leonard embarked on a short-lived career in white-collar crime, which quickly returned him to jail, this time in the Missouri State Prison. The San Bernardino police arrested him again in 1999 for failing to register as a sex offender. Shortly after the beginning of the 2000s, Leonard was accused again, this time for intimate coercion against a minor. Aside from his illicit businesses, which required him to travel across the country, he maintained relationships and intimacy with multiple women simultaneously, earning him the nickname CAs, short for Casanova. Another standout trait of his criminal behavior was making and using fake IDs and different names, ending up with almost 20 of them at some unknown time. married a woman living in California who also had an outstanding arrest warrant for a probation violation. It was during this time, under unspecified circumstances, that Leonard met Angela Rowe. Their first encounter took place in the city of Jennings in St. Louis County, Missouri. Angela was born around 1976. She had previously been in a romantic relationship with a man with whom she had other children, Alexis Conley, Acrea Conley, and Tyrese Conley. Despite being married and also being involved with another woman in Kentucky, Leonard began a relationship with Angela. After a rather brief period, he moved into her house located in the suburbs of St. Louis. Angela's home was well known among the neighbors for the constant joy radiated by her 3 young residents. From then on, Angela's house and her children also became the love nest for the new couple. By the end of 2004, Leonard and Angela had been living together for approximately a year, and according to her family and friends, their cohabitation was not without its challenges and difficulties. On Saturday, November 20th, 2004, a friend called Angela and asked to borrow $50. At that time of year, the traditional holiday season was approaching. Being a mother of 3 children, Christmas was particularly important. Therefore, Angela later took the time to decorate the house with her children, hanging large and striking candy canes at the entrance, and placing lights to add to the festivity. That weekend, the kids went to celebrate Thanksgiving early with Tyrone, their father, and his side of the family. Meanwhile, on Sunday, November 21st, Angela did not show up for her weekend shift as a housekeeper, but called to inform she would not be able to come. The following day, a friend called her, and they chatted as usual. The children returned to their mother's house and were seen by some neighbors in the following days. From that weekend in November 2004, several significant events occurred. Yet the how and when of the detailed events were something the authorities could never fully reconstruct. However, everything points to an argument between Leonard and Angela, during which she threatened him with a knife. He then overpowered her and shot her. In a turn of events, realizing that the kids had witnessed everything, Leonard took the lives of all 3 children. Afterwards, he turned off the heating and instead turned on the central air conditioning of the house. According to phone records, on November 23, 2004, at 11:24 p.m., Leonard called his brother Perry to ask for money. It is believed that during their conversation, he confessed to what had happened, adding that things had gotten out of control and that it wasn't what he wanted, but it happened. On the same day, Angela's friend called the house phone repeatedly without getting an answer. A few hours later, at 12:05 p.m. on Wednesday, November 24th, she tried again without success. Between that day and the next, Perry told his girlfriend about what Leonard had done. On Thursday, November 25th, while most American households were finalizing details to celebrate Thanksgiving, Perry went to his girlfriend's house. There, his brother contacted him again. After the conversation, Perry told the girl that Leonard was still in Angela's house, waiting for a letter from California. There were 3 more calls in the following hours, one of which was specifically made from the landline of Angela's house. It was during one of these conversations that Perry's girlfriend heard him ask Leonard how he was still there, specifically alluding to the presence of the bodies. What Leonard's response was remains unknown. Then a plane ticket from St. Louis to California was booked, with the transaction being made from a phone number with a California area code. Early in the morning of Friday, November 26th, Leonard went to his sister-in-law's house so she could take him to the airport. He had plane tickets from St. Louis to Ontario, California via Phoenix, Arizona. The ticket was in the name of Lewis Bradley, an alias that Leonard used and for which he had a Missouri ID that included his photo. He took the opportunity of being at his sister-in-law's house to leave a box that was to be delivered to his brother. Shortly after, according to some witnesses, he was seen disposing of a gun in a sewer near Perry's girlfriend's house, but the weapon was never recovered. On the way to the airport, Leonard told his sister-in-law that this would probably be the last time she would see him alive. Then, to elaborate on the strange notion, he added that some people were trying to kill him and that she should not pay attention to things she might hear about him. Cameras recorded Leonard that Friday morning passing through the security area at St. Louis International Airport. He was wearing dark pants, a pink shirt, and a cream-colored hat carrying 2 black bags. Shortly after, he headed to Gate 16 to catch the 810 Southwest Airlines flight to Ontario. Meanwhile, Angela's friend continued calling throughout those days until November 27th, never receiving a response. On the other side of the country between Saturday and Sunday, Leonard finally met up with his wife. During this time, Angela's absence was noted by her co-workers. But unlike previous occasions, There was no call from her to report anything. Leonard stayed in San Bernardino County for 4 days before driving across the country with a friend. He traveled through Texas, Louisiana, and Georgia, ending up in a house in Kentucky. For the week of November 29th, when classes resumed after the Thanksgiving holiday, the absence of Angela's kids at school did not go unnoticed. Then, with considerable concern over Angela's prolonged silence, her family asked the police to check on the woman and her 3 children. Thus, on December 3, 2004, police officers were sent to the small brick house in the suburbs of St. Louis. Once on site, the officers found several significant details, including that the front door was locked. Newspapers were piled up in the front yard and mail overflowed the mailbox. The team managed to enter through a bedroom window. The air conditioning was running at full power outside while the television was on. The next thing the agents had to face was far from an idyllic home scene. Wrapped in blankets, Angela was found lifeless, likely from gunshot wounds. Her 3 young children also appeared to have suffered fatal gunshot wounds, and their bodies were aligned on a bed in the early stages of decomposition. The coroner found out that the victims had passed away 2 or 3 days before their bodies got stiff. Meanwhile, during subsequent thorough investigations at the residence, investigators found 2 non-functional cell phones, and there was no evidence that Angela had any other cell phone in use besides her own. As often happens in such cases, Leonard was immediately considered the main suspect. This was initially due to his relationship with Angela, but it is fair to say that his extensive criminal history also raised suspicions. As the police tracked his whereabouts, Perry was interrogated about the accusations against his brother on December 8, 2004. During that interview, Perry told detectives that Leonard had called him and admitted to his actions. After an intense nationwide chase, police monitored a house in Madisonville, Kentucky, where Leonard was staying. On December 9th, Leonard tried to flee by hiding on the floor of a vehicle and was arrested on the spot, holding a knife in his hand and moving under the alias of Jason. Beyond that, he made no moves nor uttered any comments. The sunglasses Leonard wore at the time of his arrest, along with a few other belongings, were taken as evidence, although nothing seemed to suggest that these objects could provide any clues. Later, the police made some statements about the arrest. According to the detective in charge, Leonard's wife was not much help in the investigation. Authorities believed Leonard had turned to her for money to facilitate his escape. While the only suspect was finally in custody, the funeral services for Angela and her kids were held in Missouri. Standing beside his oldest daughter's coffin, Tyrone could not help but break down. Leonard maintained his innocence throughout, and indeed, his defense focused on the fact that he was in California when the bodies were discovered. His case was also based on the probable date of death stated by the coroner. However, the suspicions for the 4 deaths were only part of his legal troubles. Thus, while awaiting the resolution of the case in April 2005, Leonard began serving a 100-year sentence for an unrelated conviction. 5 months later, he filed a request for the state to notify him if there was any intention to use DNA evidence in the case involving Angela and her 3 children, and if so, what type it would be and whether physical evidence had been presented for analysis or examination. On May 25, 2006, Leonard filed a motion requesting the return of his personal belongings, including the sunglasses he wore when arrested. But in August 2006, the state took possession of the glasses and other evidence that were in police custody. And 3 months later, in November, all items were taken to the forensic lab for analysis. There, experts conducted a specialized test, which is used to determine the possible presence of blood. The procedure yielded a positive result for the presence of blood on the nose pad of the sunglasses. But there was a complication since the sample was very small. For this reason, a second confirmation test to detect the presence of DNA was not performed. Between the end of that year and the beginning of 2007, the stain was subjected to DNA testing. But due to its size, the professional in charge could not obtain a complete genetic profile. What was obtained from the partial genetic profile excluded Angela's children. However, the presence of her DNA could not be ruled out from the study. Specifically, the result had a probability of matching 1 in every 12,300 people belonging to the African American population. In May 2007, Leonard filed a motion to exclude the results of these tests as evidence in the trial. A hearing was held where the state explained that the reports were disclosed as soon as they were received and that contrary to what Leonard suggested, the evidence was not deliberately hidden. Ultimately, the trial court rejected his request. In January 2008, Leonard again insisted on the same point by filing a new motion to exclude any evidence related to the specialized test. Another hearing took place, and the court overruled Leonard's objection, thus admitting the validity of the results as evidence of the presumed presence of blood. During the trial that year, Leonard objected to the admission of this evidence, but again faced a setback when the trial court dismissed his objections. However, the forensic scientist who conducted the test testified that the test is presumptive because it can also yield a positive reaction to substances like potatoes, rust, bleach, and nickel. He also emphasized that since there was no confirmatory examination, the substance on the glasses was only possibly blood. Leonard did not testify at his trial. However, the coroner did testify, and his testimony marked a significant turn in the case, as he stated that the deaths could have occurred 2 or 3 weeks before the officers visited the house. This detail firmly placed the incident before Leonard's departure to California. He also explained that he had not initially considered the detail that the air conditioning thermostat was set to the maximum cold setting. When the state called Perry as a witness, the case seemed to turn again, especially when asked about his statement during the police interrogation, where he said that Leonard had confessed to the acts. He said he did not remember anything that happened and went even further to claim that his statements to the police had been the result of coercion by the authorities. After hearing from the various witnesses, it was time for the closing arguments. The state, represented by the prosecution, emphasized that the blood sample found on the man's sunglasses was indeed Angela's. In this sense, it was recalled that scientific evidence does not need to be conclusive to be admissible. Indeed, while some states require it to be so, other states have held that presumptive blood tests are admissible as long as they are accurately described, achieving their purpose of being useful to the jury. After deliberating for 4.5 hours, the jury found Leonard Taylor guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 4 counts of armed criminal action. But there is something particular about his sentencing. Although it has not been possible to determine when and how, it seems that during his time in prison, Leonard converted to Islam, even changing his name to Rahim. Thus, during the sentencing hearing, also known as the penalty phase, he prohibited his defense team from presenting witnesses. Instead, he stated he was Muslim, and expressed to the judge that Allah, not the court, would determine his fate. The state presented evidence, including Leonard's previous convictions. Testimony was also offered from a victim who was forced by Leonard to have intimacy and 3 members of Angela's family. The jury found 5 aggravating factors for each victim, among them mental provocation, which made the acts considered outrageously vile, horrendous and inhumane, thereby exhibiting cruelty and disdain for the sanctity of all human life. Consequently, Leonard was sentenced to capital punishment. The execution by lethal injection was scheduled for February 7, 2023 at a Missouri prison. The case attracted the attention of several groups dedicated to defending Leonard's innocence and therefore demanding a review and commutation of the sentence. However, the man's claims of innocence were rejected time and again. In response to some of the appeals, the Missouri Attorney General's office stated that the case against him was solid. Perry, Leonard's brother, died in 2015. In January 2023, as the execution date loomed, Leonard's attorneys requested a hearing on their client's claim of innocence. They were supported by a provision in Missouri law which allows a prosecutor to file a motion for a hearing before a judge in case of new evidence of a wrongful conviction. Firstly, Leonard's defense team proposed a theory about an alternative perpetrator. After a drug deal went wrong, Leonard thought he would be targeted for murder, so he quickly left town. However, the traffickers showed up at Angela's house, and failing to find him or the illicit substances they believed were hidden there, they unleashed their fury on her and her 3 young children. Secondly, the defense team obtained statements from Leonard's daughter and from Mia, her mother. Both stated that he was in California at the end of November 2004, and according to the lawyers, he could not have been the perpetrator of the crimes. These documents were subsequently presented to the Conviction Review Unit within the prosecutor's office. The following month, just hours before the execution, St. Louis County prosecutor rejected the request for a hearing before a judge, stating that the facts did not support a credible case of innocence. Concurrently, the governor refused to grant a pardon, and the United States Supreme Court also declined to intervene. Finally, on Tuesday, February 7, 2023, in the evening, everything was arranged to carry out the procedure. In his final statement, Leonard said that Muslims do not die, but live eternally in the hearts of family and friends. Taylor kicked his feet as the 5 grams of pentobarbital were administered, then took 5 or 6 deep breaths before all movement stopped.